The early morning fog still clung to the dirt of Fort Valor, a base tucked deep in the heart of Georgia, where young recruits came in soft and left with steel in their veins. The sun hadn't risen yet, but the boots had already hit the ground. The buzz of uncertainty filled the air as a fresh batch of recruits stood in formation, stiff with nerves and sleep-deprived confusion. Then she walked in. Sergeant Riley Dawson wasn't tall, but her presence towered over them. Her face bore the signature of Warlong, pale scars trailing down her right cheek, disappearing beneath her uniform collar. Another curled along her forearm, visible just under the edge of her rolled-up sleeve. Her expression was unreadable, her walk firm despite the subtle limp. She didn't bother to hide. The recruits didn't know her name yet, but they noticed the silence that fell when she stepped onto the training ground out among them. Private Jace Monroe stifled a laugh. "Who let the zombie in?" he whispered to the recruit next to him, grinning smugly. Must have stitched her together from leftovers. A few chuckled under their breath, but most stayed quiet, eyes forward. Riley said nothing. She moved past them like a ghost made of discipline and gunpowder, inspecting the line, scanning faces. Her eyes briefly landed on Monroe, but not long enough to make a scene. Just long enough to remind him she had heard him and didn't care. The group was handed over to her that morning, their official instructor for the next 8 weeks of brutal basic training. The commanding officer made it clear. "Sergeant Dawson has seen more combat than most of you will ever dream of. Listen, learn, survive." As soon as they were alone, her voice sliced through the morning chill like a blade. "I'm not your babysitter. I'm not your friend. I'm the wall between you and failure. Understand?" "Yes, Sergeant," they shouted back, though their voices trembled. "Then move." She ran them hard. No mercy, no excuses. Recruits dropped to their knees in exhaustion. Some vomited. Others cried in the shower stalls when they thought no one could hear. Riley watched it all with a calm, calculated eye, not out of cruelty, but because she knew what it took to keep people alive when things got real. Still, Monroe kept his attitude. "She walks like she's got one leg in the grave." He joked one evening. Bet she got those scars tripping over her own ego. He was loud. He wanted her to hear, and she did. But again nothing. No reprimand. No punishment. Not yet. It irritated him more than if she had yelled. He didn't understand why someone like her got to walk around like a legend, when she looked like she belonged in a hospital bed. What Monroe didn't know, what none of them knew, was that those scars came from a roadside bomb outside Kandahar, that Riley had been thrown from a Humvee, bleeding and burning, only to crawl back through the fire to drag out 3 of her brothers in arms. 2 lived. 1 didn't. But that was a story she hadn't told them. Not yet. That night, Monroe and a few others were in the barracks, laughing quietly. He mimicked her voice, lowering his pitch and walking with an exaggerated limp. The others laughed nervously, unsure if it was funny or foolish. Riley stood just outside the door, listening. She turned, walked away without a word, because Sergeant Riley Dawson believed in something most recruits hadn't learned yet. The battlefield isn't always out there, it starts in the mind, and soon, Monroe would learn that to one humiliating lesson at a time. The second week brought heat. Georgia's sun beat down like punishment, and temper simmered just beneath the surface. Blisters formed on hands and feet. Sleep was rare, comfort non-existent. Recruits were learning the difference between discomfort and despair, but Monroe, he still hadn't learned humility. Every morning, Riley stood in front of them, expression hard as granite, scars exposed like living proof of survival. Her commands were clear, sharp, and precise. No one questioned her tactics. They were brutal, but they worked. Monroe, however, couldn't help himself. During formation, he'd nudge the guy next to him. "Watch the way she limps. I swear she's powered by WD-40." Snickers rippled, some hesitant, some real. He thrived on the attention. Monroe wasn't the worst recruit when it came to physical performance, but mentally, he was immature, cocky, used to being the center of the room. What he didn't realize was that his jokes weren't just noticed, they were being remembered. One afternoon, during a forced march through thick brush and steep terrain, Riley led from the front. No other drill sergeant did that. Most walked alongside or behind. Not her. She carried her gear, limped through the dust, and never once asked for a break. Sweat soaked through her camo, streaking down the burned scars on her neck like rain on cracked earth. Monroe trudged behind, whispering, "Bet she's doing it for sympathy. Just wants us to feel sorry for her." But others weren't laughing as easily now. Private Lewis, a quiet kid from Montana, snapped at him. "Then why is she still at the front, carrying twice as much as you?" Monroe brushed it off. But a flicker of insecurity touched his face. He was no longer the center of the group. Riley was. Not because she tried to be, but because she simply outperformed, outlasted, and outdisciplined every single one of them. That night in the mess hall, Monroe raised his voice again. Y'all ever wonder what she looked like before she got melted? Bet she was hot. The table went silent. Riley was behind him. He didn't see her, but the recruits did, and their eyes grew wide with panic. Private Monroe, she said coolly. He stiffened and slowly turned. Yes, Sergeant. She stared at him for a long second, no anger in her eyes. Just that eerie calm that always seemed more dangerous than rage. Finish your food. You're on latrine duty until further notice. He swallowed. Yes, Sergeant. She turned and walked off, her limp rhythmic, steady. After she left, no one said a word for several minutes. Monroe felt heat creep up his neck, not from shame but from the sharp bite of being publicly neutralized. He wasn't used to being dismissed. He didn't understand that real authority didn't raise its voice, it crushed with silence. That night, in the barracks, Monroe threw his boots hard against the locker, frustrated. She thinks she's above all of us. Just because she's got some damn scars and a limp doesn't make her special. No one responded. Not this time. The room had shifted earlier that day. While cleaning gear, Private Lewis had overheard one of the instructors talking. You know who she is, right? He'd whispered. That's Phoenix. The one from the Alpha 7 convoy bombing. She pulled 3 soldiers out of a flaming Humvee. Lewis hadn't told Monroe yet, but he didn't need to. The way Riley held herself, the way she never flinched, never complained, never bragged, it was starting to say more than any rumor ever could. But Monroe, he was still caught in the illusion of toughness, blind to the difference between noise and strength, and soon, that illusion would come crashing down with fire, smoke, and silence. By the 3rd week, the real separation began. Weak recruits started folding under pressure, and the strong began to emerge not just in body, but in mind. Riley pushed them harder now. Wake-up calls came before sunrise. Obstacle courses were doubled. Gear inspections became ruthless. She didn't yell much, but when she did, her voice hit like a hammer striking steel. The recruits hated her and respected her in equal measure. One blistering afternoon, Riley stood before them at the base of the infamous Hill 40, a steep, jagged incline used to test endurance. This time, they'd be climbing with full rucks. You're going to the top and back twice, she said, pacing before them. Anyone who drops gear or whines goes again. Groans erupted. I didn't ask for commentary, she barked, eyes narrowing. Move. The recruits scrambled. Monroe took off fast, determined to outpace everyone, especially her. But he didn't last. The weight wore him down halfway up the hill. Sweat poured off his face, and his legs began to shake. By the first summit, he collapsed beside a tree, panting. While Riley marched past him without breaking stride, she didn't look at him, didn't offer a word. By the time she made it back down, and then started her second climb, recruits began noticing. She's going again? Private Lewis muttered. She didn't even rest, whispered someone else. Riley was now ahead of most of them again. Monroe grit his teeth and forced himself up. He wasn't going to be shown up by her, but his legs weren't cooperating. As he stumbled back down the slope, his foot caught a root and he hit the ground hard, shoulder first. Damn it, he growled. Riley was already coming up behind him again. You all right, Private? She asked, voice calm. I'm fine. He snapped. Then get up. He did, barely, and joined the others at the bottom. His pride was fractured, his confidence dented. But it wasn't the fall that hurt the most, it was the realization that Riley, the woman he mocked, had just dominated them all without flinching. Back at the barracks, bruises turned to silence. No jokes that night. Monroe sat quietly on his bunk, rubbing his aching knee. Across the room, Lewis looked over. You really don't know who she is, do you? He asked quietly. Monroe frowned. What are you talking about? Phoenix, Lewis said. That's what they called her. Alpha 7, Kandahar. Monroe rolled his eyes. You mean that's real? Lewis nodded. She dragged 3 soldiers out of a burning vehicle, one on fire, took shrapnel to the face and arms. They thought she was dead. Monroe said nothing. You've been mocking a legend, man. That word legend gnawed at Monroe. He thought about the obstacle course, her silence, her strength, her eyes. She wasn't just some hard-ass drill instructor. She was something else entirely. But he couldn't admit it, not yet. The next morning, Riley ordered another march. This one deeper into the woods, under simulated combat pressure. Stay alert, she told them. Stay together, and if you panic you fail. Monroe was still sore, but he kept pace. The woods were dark, sounds echoing from hidden speakers, gunfire, shouting, simulated chaos. Fog rolled in as the sun dipped behind the trees. Suddenly, smoke grenades popped. A loud bang rang out. Recruits scattered. Monroe froze, his breath caught. He ducked behind a log, disoriented, vision blurred by fog and noise. Then he felt a firm grip yank him up by the vest. Move! Riley barked, pulling him to his feet. She ran beside him, dodging through fake fire and disorienting sound until they reached a rally point. Monroe fell to the ground, heaving. I didn't need saving, he muttered. Riley crouched beside him, her eyes emotionless. Good. Then next time, don't freeze. She walked away. But something had shifted in Monroe's chest, a crack forming where arrogance used to live. The woods still echoed in Monroe's ears long after the simulated firefight had ended. The smoke had cleared, the gunshots had faded into memory. But one thing remained: Riley Dawson dragging him out of the chaos. That image replayed in his mind again and again, her scarred hand gripping his vest, her eyes burning like live ammunition. He couldn't forget the way she looked at him, not with pity, not with rage, but with something worse, disappointment. The platoon marched back in silence. Even the usually loud-mouthed recruits had nothing to say. Everyone had seen it. Monroe freeze. Riley pulled him to safety. Later in the day, during the debriefing, Riley stood in front of them. Half of you moved like civilians. You panic, you scatter, you die, she said sharply. This was a simulation. Next time, it might not be. Monroe clenched his fists. She looked directly at him. Some of you are brave until you're tested. Others stay quiet and stand up when it counts. Figure out which one you are. The room stayed silent as she dismissed them. Monroe stayed seated a moment longer, his eyes burning into the floor. In the barracks that night, he was restless. Sleep evaded him. His pride, once inflated and untouchable, now lay tattered on the floor with his gear. He finally snapped. This is ridiculous, he muttered, throwing his shirt at the wall. She acts like she's some war hero, and we're all supposed to bow to her. It was just a simulation. Private Lewis, who had been silent all evening, looked up from his bunk. You think she acts like a hero? She doesn't even talk about it. You just keep disrespecting someone who's done more in one day than you've done in your whole life. Monroe glared. She saved me. Big deal. I didn't ask her to. Lewis stood up now. You didn't have to. She didn't ask for scars either, but she earned them. The room quieted. Then Riley walked in. She had heard every word. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't bark. She just stared Monroe down as if she were looking through him, not at him. You think this is about you? She asked. Her voice was low but sharp enough to cut. Monroe swallowed hard but said nothing. Riley stepped closer. You know how many soldiers froze just like you? Good people. People I trained with, laughed with, bled with. 1 second of hesitation in a firefight is all it takes. Her voice trembled slightly, not with weakness, but from the weight of memory. You think you know what this is? It's not a game. It's not about yelling or punishment. It's about staying alive when everything inside you wants to run. For a moment, the room seemed smaller, like the air had thickened around them. She turned away. You'll either learn what that means or you'll break before you ever wear a uniform in battle. And just like that, she left. Monroe sat down slowly, chest tight. He didn't speak the rest of the night. The next morning, Riley led PT like usual. No acknowledgement of the previous night. No extra punishment. That was her way. But something had changed. Monroe followed every command precisely. He didn't crack jokes. He didn't look for laughs. He kept his eyes on her, trying, for the first time, to understand instead of judge. That afternoon, during weapons drills, he stayed late after everyone else had left. Riley noticed. She didn't say anything, just watched as he broke down and reassembled his rifle over and over, sweat dripping, hands shaking. Later, Lewis found him sitting alone outside. Starting to get it? He asked. Monroe nodded, slowly. She doesn't need our respect. She already earned it. We're just late catching up. Lewis smiled. Better late than never. But the real reckoning hadn't come yet. The next day, Monroe would be called into the general's office and everything would change. The next morning started like any other until Monroe's name echoed over the intercom. Private Monroe, report to General Coleman's office, immediately. Heads turned, recruits stiffened. Monroe's throat tightened as he stood. The general? He hadn't done anything wrong, at least nothing that warranted the base's highest authority. With nerves building, he followed the winding path through administration, past salutes and guarded doors, until he reached the general's office. A stern officer opened the door. Enter. Monroe stepped inside. General Coleman sat behind a large desk, decorated with awards and photographs. He looked up with sharp eyes, gray, unreadable. Sit down. Private. Monroe obeyed. The general leaned back and folded his hands. You've been under Sergeant Dawson's command for 3 weeks. Yes, sir. You've questioned her, mocked her, challenged her authority. Monroe opened his mouth, but Coleman raised a hand. I'm not interested in your excuses. I want you to see something. He turned to a nearby cabinet, opened it, and pulled out a thick folder marked confidential. Inside was a flash drive. He inserted it into a monitor. The screen flickered on. Monroe watched, frozen. The footage was grainy. Body cam and drone footage spliced together. A Humvee convoy traveling through a dusty Afghan road. Then an explosion. Fire, screams, chaos. One soldier, already on fire, crawled from the wreckage. The others were unconscious or pinned. Then she appeared dryly, scarless, younger, but still. She was bleeding from her head, limping heavily. She screamed into her calms and ran straight into the flames. One by one, she pulled soldiers from the vehicle. Her arms caught fire. Still, she dragged them rolling, crawling, refusing to stop. When she pulled the last one free, her entire back was scorched, her face mangled. The video paused on the final image. Her lying beside the men she saved, motionless. Smoke rising from her gear. Coleman spoke. She flatlined twice before the medics brought her back. Spent 6 months in ICU, dozens of surgeries. Then, she came back here and asked to serve again. Monroe was silent, trembling. She didn't come back for medals. She came back to train soldiers so they wouldn't die the way her brothers almost did. The general stared at him. Her call sign was Phoenix because she rose from ashes. And you mocked her. Monroe's eyes burned. Sir, I didn't know. No, Coleman said. You didn't care to know. That's worse. He leaned in, his voice low. You think scars make someone weak. Every scar she carries is a reminder that others lived because she bled. Monroe swallowed hard. She didn't report you. She didn't shame you in front of others. But I'm doing it now because it's time you understood what real strength looks like. Coleman stood. You're dismissed. Monroe stood on unsteady legs, saluted shakily, and exited the room without a word. Outside, the air felt heavier. The world looked different. He sat under a tree beside the path, hands buried in his face, shame wrapped around him like a vice. Back at the barracks, recruits noticed his absence. When he returned, he said nothing. He walked straight to Riley's office, knocked once. She looked up. He stood at attention. I saw the footage, Sergeant. I saw you in Afghanistan. I saw Phoenix. She didn't blink. And his voice cracked. I'm sorry for everything. She stood slowly, walked to him, and studied him. You think one apology makes it right? No, Sergeant. I just wanted you to know I see it now. A long silence passed. She nodded once, then acted like it. He saluted and left. For the first time since arriving, he felt small, not because she'd made him feel that way, but because he finally understood the scale of her strength. And in that moment, Jace Monroe took his first real step toward becoming a soldier. The next morning, Monroe was the first one awake. He stood in the dark outside the barracks, fully dressed, boots laced, rifle cleaned, not to impress anyone but because he couldn't sleep. The general's words, Riley's silence, and the fire-lit image of Phoenix dragging lives from hell looped in his mind like a punishment. When Riley arrived for morning PT, she raised a brow at the sight of him already in formation. You're early, she said. No excuse not to be, Sergeant. A pause, then a short nod. The others trickled in with sleepy eyes and sore legs. Monroe didn't speak. He helped set up the cones. He ran every drill with ruthless focus, keeping pace even when his chest burned. No complaints. No showboating. Just grit. The change didn't go unnoticed. Private Lewis caught up to him during a water break. You all right, man? Monroe wiped his face and nodded. I was wrong. That's all. I've got a lot to fix. Lewis gave a half smile. She'll see it. She watches everything. Riley, true to form, never said a word about his transformation, but she tested him. She assigned him the lead on fire team movement drills, something he had failed miserably at before. This time, he didn't stumble. He listened, adjusted, communicated. When a teammate twisted his ankle, Monroe dropped to help carry him through the rest of the course. Riley stood at a distance, arms crossed, eyes unreadable. Later, in the training bay, she called him aside. You think because you saw one video, you know who I am? No, Sergeant. I think because I watched you lead, I'm just starting to understand. She studied him. Pain teaches, But it doesn't always stick. You're serious now. Will you stay that way? I will. Another silence passed between them. Then she handed him a stack of manuals. Study these. You'll be giving tomorrow's gear briefing. His jaw dropped slightly. That role usually went to top-tier recruits. Yes, Sergeant, he said quickly, surprised but honored. As he walked away, Riley allowed herself the smallest of smiles. Not because he'd changed overnight, but because she knew what it looked like when pride shattered, and something better was rebuilt. That evening, Monroe sat alone outside the barracks, manuals in hand, reading under a lamplight, his posture straight, lips moving silently as he rehearsed. Nearby, Riley leaned against a wall, unnoticed, watching. It wasn't about the apology anymore. It was about discipline, about heart. He had finally begun to carry what she wanted every soldier under her to understand the burden of responsibility. Later that night, General Coleman visited the training grounds. Riley stood with him by the firing range. He seems different, the general said, eyes on Monroe in the distance. Riley nodded once. Pain reached him. Do you think he gets it now? We'll see. Respect is earned when no one's watching, and he's just started earning his own. Coleman smiled slightly. He's lucky you didn't crush him. You've done more than just train him. You've given him a mirror. I didn't give it to him, she replied. He found it. I just didn't look away when he saw who he really was. They watched in silence as Monroe helped another recruit adjust their shooting stance. Patient and quiet. No more mocking. No more noise. Just action. And Riley knew. True change didn't come with grand speeches. It came with a soldier, quietly standing taller than the day before. By the 7th week, the platoon was leaner, harder, and quieter. The weak had been weeded out. The rest had learned that becoming a soldier wasn't about ego or attitude. It was about endurance, respect, and showing up even when everything hurt. Jace Monroe had become one of the strongest, not because he ran the fastest or lifted the most, but because he had finally stopped trying to prove something to everyone and started proving it to himself. During weapons inspection, his rifle was spotless, his uniform flawless. Riley walked past without a word, and that silence now felt like approval. Later that day, Riley stood before the platoon. Tomorrow is field evaluation. You'll be operating in live fire simulation. Squad leaders have been chosen. She called out names. When she reached Monroe, she didn't pause. Squad Charlie. Monroe, you lead. He blinked for a second. He thought he heard wrong, but the others looked at him with nods of acknowledgement. No longer mockery, no longer pity, just respect. Yes, Sergeant, he replied, standing tall. That night, he studied the terrain maps, memorized call signs, assigned roles. He didn't sleep. He didn't need to. He was ready. The field exercise began at dawn. Fog rolled over the hills, turning everything into a gray blur. Recruits moved like shadows through the underbrush. Paint rounds fired from hidden stations. Explosions echoed in the distance. Monroe moved with purpose. He signaled. He watched over his team. He led with steady hands and sharper focus. When a recruit tripped and rolled down a shallow slope, Monroe didn't yell. He dropped beside him, checked for injury, pulled him up, and they moved together. Riley watched from the command tent, her expression unreadable, headset crackling with field comms. Charlie squad is clean. An observer noted. Monroe's holding the line. Hours passed. Simulated injuries, team retrievals, time pressure. Monroe's squad completed the mission in near record time with no casualties. When they returned, covered in dirt and sweat, Riley stood waiting. She stepped forward, her eyes locked with Monroe's. Report, squad leader. Squad Charlie accounted for. 0 lost, 1 minor injury. Mission completed. Sergeant, she didn't smile, but she nodded. Double quotes good. Fallen. That evening, as the sun dipped low, Monroe walked to her office again. Not as a recruit desperate for forgiveness, but as a soldier grateful for growth. She looked up when he entered. Why are you here? I wanted to thank you, he said. Not for giving me a second chance, but for not protecting me from my own stupidity. You let me fall. She leaned back, arms crossed. And you got back up. He nodded. I didn't understand before. The scars, the silence. I thought it made you less. But it makes you more. You didn't just survive. You came back to make people better. There was a pause. Then Riley stood and stepped closer. You know what my CO told me after Kandahar, he said. The only thing more dangerous than a bullet is a man who refuses to learn. She pointed to her scars. These aren't what almost killed me. It was thinking I had nothing left to offer afterward. Monroe met her eyes. You were wrong. I know, she said. So were you. A silence passed. This one wasn't heavy. It was earned. She extended her hand. He shook it firmly. You're not finished yet, she said. But you're becoming someone I'd trust in my squad. That meant more than any medal later. At the campfire pit outside the barracks, the recruits sat around eating MREs and telling stories. Monroe listened more than he spoke. A few glanced at him and nodded. He wasn't the loudest anymore. He didn't need to be. The firelight danced across his face and across Riley's scars as she passed by in the dark. Silent and sharp-eyed. This time, no one mocked her. They stood a little straighter when she walked by, because now they all knew who she was, and who he was becoming. Graduation day dawned bright. The sky streaked with gold and pale blue as the morning sun rose over Fort Valor. Flags danced in the breeze. Rows of folding chairs lined the parade ground, where families gathered, their faces full of hope and pride. Monroe stood in formation with his fellow recruits, their uniforms crisp, boots polished, eyes ahead. 8 weeks of blood, sweat, and transformation stood behind them. What lay ahead was unknown, but they were ready. He wasn't the same man who had arrived, cocky and loud, mocking a woman he didn't understand. Now, he stood taller, shoulders squared, not out of arrogance, but earned confidence. From the stage, the commanding officer gave the final address. Then came the moment all recruits waited for, the ceremonial march. As the platoon was called forward, Riley stood off to the side, clipboard in hand, eyes sharp. She watched every movement, every salute. Her posture still carried a slight limp, but her presence was unshakable. Monroe's name was called. He stepped forward, received his certificate, saluted, and turned to face the crowd. In the front row, his parents clapped, his mother with tears in her eyes, his father's face proud, but stunned. They didn't know what had changed in him, not yet, but they would soon. As Monroe returned to formation, a quiet murmur began in the crowd. It started with one voice. Is that her, Phoenix? From Alpha 7. It spread like wind through leaves. Riley had stepped onto the field to give final commendations. Her scars caught the light, silver against tan skin. A hush fell over the space. The general approached, microphone in hand. He nodded toward her. Most of you know her as Sergeant Dawson, but some of us know her as something else entirely. He turned to the crowd. She's Phoenix, the hero of Alpha 7, the one who crawled through fire so others could live. Gasps rippled. Even recruits who had trained under her didn't know the full weight of her story until now. She's trained hundreds since coming home, changed lives, made warriors. She doesn't wear her medals because she wears her story. The general looked at Monroe. Some of you had to learn that the hard way. Monroe felt every eye turn toward him, but for the first time, he didn't shrink from it. He stepped forward, faced Riley, and saluted. Permission to address the sergeant, sir, he asked the general. Coleman gave a nod. Granted. Monroe turned to her, eyes steady. Sergeant Dawson Phoenix, he said, his voice strong. Thank you for breaking me down, for saving me twice. Once in the woods and once from myself. Riley studied him for a moment. Then, she returned the salute. You built yourself back, she replied. I just gave you the pieces. The recruits clapped. The crowd followed. It wasn't raucous, it was respectful, deep, earned. As the ceremony ended, Monroe lingered. Near the edge of the field, families reunited, friends laughed, but he stood alone for a moment, just watching the flag wave in the wind. Riley approached. Still think scars make someone weak? She asked, eyebrow raised. Monroe smiled faintly. No, ma'am. I think they make people unforgettable. She nodded. Good answer. He hesitated. You think I've earned the right to serve beside people like you? She looked at him long and hard. You've earned the right to start, she said, and with that, she turned and walked away, her limp steady, her head high, her shadow long across the grass. As she disappeared into the crowd, Monroe whispered to himself, almost reverently, Phoenix. He wasn't saluting a call sign anymore. He was honoring a legend, and becoming one.